So on this, we are talking about an op-ed by the EU's ambassador to China, Nicolas Chapuis, and the 27 member states of the EU member state, the 27 ambassadors of the EU member states, and this op-ed was drafted and agreed on the occasion of the 45th anniversary of the EU-China diplomatic relations. And we regret that this op-ed, this joint op-ed, was not published in full by the China Daily. The full version of the op-ed has been published on the website of a delegation to China, and it has been also distributed to Chinese media outlets, some of which have in the meantime published it as well in full.
Thank you very much. Okay. Are there other questions on foreign relations? Frédéric Roard, is your question on foreign relations?
Yes, it's just a follow-up. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. Just to know, was the EAS aware of the suppression of a reference to the outbreak of the virus in China prior to the publication of this text? And did the EAS formally protested against this censorship? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. The EU delegation to China was informed that the publication could only take place in China Daily and its Chinese version, Chinese language version, only with the agreement of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The EU delegation to China made known its concern to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China in no uncertain terms, both on the process and on the request to remove, as you mentioned, a part of a sentence which relates to the origin and spread of the coronavirus. This request was made to allow publication, and we made very clear that we had serious concern about this. The EU continues to advocate for free press and other human rights, actually, and freedoms, including by voicing of views to our Chinese counterparts and at all levels. On this specific case, the EU delegation decided nevertheless to proceed with the publication of the op-ed with considerable reluctance, as it considered it important to communicate on very key messages on EU policy priorities. And just to name a few, I would mention climate change and sustainability, human rights, multilateralism, and the global response to the coronavirus. As I said, the full and unedited op-ed was published on the EU delegation's website and actually on several EU member states' websites, also used on social media channels and distributed to Chinese media outlets who have used it.
Okay, thank you. David, je vois que tu as levé ta main. Est-ce que c'est sur...
David, I saw that your hand was raised. Is it a question relating to foreign affairs? Yes, a follow-up. Yes, thank you very much, Eric. So, is it acceptable, or has this been done by the EU government for other reasons? Eric, well, it's just been said that the ambassador took a decision there on the basis of a balance between different considerations. So it was a one-off decision pursuing a specific objective to get a certain number of messages across. It doesn't mean that we accept censure. We don't accept censure, as we've just said. But our delegation in China is working, of course, in a very specific context and needs to take a decision about the best way to communicate a number of messages there. And then a follow-up, if I may, Eric. It's the second time in a few days that China is putting pressure on the European Union, and the European Union then accepts to change its position. specifically the EEAS. And in both of these cases, well, there was the disinformation report, there was an internal version, and then there was the version that was actually published. And now it's the same story on the basis of this op-ed. So just to ask you the question once again, relations with China on important issues such as climate change, is that more important than the fundamental values of the European Union? Eric, well, it's you who said that we changed our report last week under Chinese pressure, and that wasn't the case. We explained that in depth, what the situation was there. On our complex relationship with China, let me just remind you that last year the European Commission adopted a communication on our relationship with China, very clearly describing the complexity of the relationship, which explains that China is simultaneously a partner on a number of fundamental issues, such as combating climate change, for example, a negotiating partner as well. As you know, we have negotiations underway with China on an agreement on financial services, for example. It's also an economic competitor that's trying to find an economic advantage in technology, and a systemic rival on governance models. And it is the reality, it is a complex reality, and it's within that context that our relationship with China takes place and all of our activities. Thank you.
Parfait. Y a-t-il d'autres questions?
Okay, any other questions relating to foreign and external relations? Some people still seem to have their hands up who've asked their questions. So can you just check that Anna and James and Jorge, you'd already asked questions. Krzysztof.
Foreign relations. Krzysztof, you have the floor. We're trying to give you the floor. Hold on, you don't have it yet. Sorry. Tu le vois? Okay, sorry, we seem to have a technical problem. We will move to Lily. We'll come back to you, Krzysztof. Lily, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to the China issue that you were discussing. More broadly, one thing that we've heard a lot in the press room and from President von der Leyen, Vice President Jourova, is the importance that the Commission puts on media freedom. How does that fit in with the Commission's decision to agree to publish a censored article? I understand you said that it was with reluctance, but all the same, how can the Commission on the one hand be saying that it's advocating for media freedom and against censorship and trying to empower journalists to do their job, and then agreeing to something like this? Thank you.
Lily, I believe we've made the comments that we can make on this. The head of the delegation in China took a decision with great reluctance in view of a balance of interests. Do you want to add something to this, Virginie?
Well, maybe to describe in greater details the way things are and how people and diplomats work in China. China has state-controlled media. There is censorship. That's a fact. And in its contacts with Chinese media, the EU delegation, as well as other diplomatic missions in Beijing, works under the condition and within the limits which are established by the Chinese authorities. On the other hand, Chinese diplomatic missions and other Chinese actors on their side, as you know, operate in a free press environment in the European Union and even use social media platforms that are banned in China to get their message across. On our side, our delegation, like all other countries' embassies operate in the environment that exists in China and does everything it can to pass EU messages to the Chinese public. That's public diplomacy, and that is part of the reason why they're there. They do that in spite of the obvious challenges. And as you said yourself, we have made very clear that the delegation agreed to this with considerable reluctance to make sure that we pass a number of messages on priority areas. Sometimes these messages are difficult to pass, but this one, in this case, even the edited version had these elements. Again, I stress human rights. Human rights include press freedom, by the way. Climate change and sustainability, the importance of multilateralism, and the coronavirus global response. These are messages that are very important for the European Union to pass to the Chinese, and the delegation made that decision bearing this in mind.
Thank you. Okay.